Welcome to Between Two Chairs, Demystifying Commercial Real Estate, the podcast that brings you the latest insights and trends on the South Florida commercial real estate market, with your hosts, Fernando Arencibia Jr. and Jennifer Woolman. In each episode, we dive into the world of commercial real estate and break down complex concepts to make them accessible for everyone. Whether you're a real estate professional, a curious investor, or just interested in the South Florida market in general, Between Two Chairs is the podcast for you. So pull up a chair and join us.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Between Two Chairs. My name is Fernando Arencibia, and with me, as always, is the very adaptive Jennifer Woolman. Jennifer, say hi.
Hello, everybody.
And adaptive is the appropriate term, don't you think, Jennifer?
Yes, considering what we're going to be talking about today.
Absolutely. I also like that it is, a synonym for flexibility. And oftentimes in real estate, you have to be flexible. And it's often very important to be able to look at things for what they are, but also for its potential and what it can become. I have historically had a really good feeling when I'm in a meeting with an investor and we go see a property and they begin to envision what it could be. They can immediately create an image in their mind of what the space has the potential to become, and not everybody has that. Some people just look at things very black and white and this is what it is, and they can't imagine it being something else. I always find it really interesting that there are those people that can immediately put a vision in place, that can immediately visualize and imagine what a space can be. And that's one of the things that we're going to be discussing today, because you had mentioned in one of our prior podcasts about some of the office buildings that are transforming themselves, whether they're becoming something totally new or they're being transformed, but they're keeping the envelope.
Yes, I guess that's right. Just say something. So when we did our mid-year update, we talked about two projects. One of them was in Doral. It was 8300 Northwest 33rd Street. That was 109, almost 110,000 square foot building on an almost 7-acre lot.
Right.
That was built in 1998, which I guess is old by Miami standards, not by European standards, but by Miami standards. And they're calling it an office conversion, but I don't really consider it an office to resi conversion because they actually just tore down the building. And they're using the Live Local Act to build residential units. It was interesting because this building was one of three buildings, the one right next door, which is 8200, and then the building that we're in, which is bizarre. It skips, and there's two schools, and then it skips a street, and then there's our building, and those three buildings were built around the same time, and they were owned by Prudential Insurance, and the other two also sold. So this one, 8300, sold in January of this year, and the other two sold just now, and they just closed in March. But it was interesting because driving to work, all of a sudden, I knew the buildings were for sale, but then all of a sudden I see this one in the middle torn down, basically just rubble. And so I thought that was interesting. They're building under the Live Local Act.
Well, I think, look, there's a few things that I think we should, uncover here. One of them, and we've discussed this in the past, is about the concept of the highest and best use. And it's, the fact that just because there is an existing structure in land, right, doesn't mean that is the highest and best use for that land. And that has a lot to do with zoning, has a lot to do with changes that happen over time, right? And so that will be number one. Number two, I think if you were asking any commercial broker outside of the state of Florida, right, about, well, it's a 30-year-old office building and we're going to demolish it and build something else, they would be like no brainer, right? But I think part of the surprise here, right, when you look at it superficially, just the initial look is that we know that we have the healthiest office market right? And not only is this located in the healthiest office market, but it is centrally located in Doral, which is a city that grows by twice its population from 9 to 5. That's because of the large centers of employment. So office is very healthy in Doral. And I think that would be another thing that surprises you. But I think a big part of this is, and I was thinking about this on the way here to have this conversation with you, is if that envelope, if that building was not sitting on 7 acres, but was sitting on an acre or you know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Would they have made the same decision?
Well, I think it's mostly the Live Local Act, right?
Right.
So I think that zoning change really, and I'm not sure how that is going to play out. I know it's good for affordability and everything else. At least that's the plan, is, to be able to bypass the public hearings required to change zoning. However, everything now in Miami that's commercially zoned, everyone says, oh, under the Live Local Act, you can do X, Y, Z.
Right.
So, I think to your point about highest and best use, is highest and best use always going to be residential under the Live Local Act, right? I mean, and that's kind of what is playing out now. It's still very, very early days of this whole process, but I think it's super interesting. It also begs the question, is affordable housing affordable? This was purchased for $26.5 million, and then the joint venture that's building these secured a $92.3 million construction loan. It's going to be 380 units. I believe it's 380 units. So, it's going to be mostly workforce housing. They're setting aside a lot of workforce housing, and then the balance is going to be, at market rents. What's interesting is right across the street.
Well, the acquisition, before you get into that, the acquisition is not, it's not too crazy. They're paying $3.7 million per acre, $86 a square foot of land, right? So I think from land value, it's not a crazy valuation. I think the next part is what you're mentioning.
Correct.
Is the construction cost is what's really going to kill, right?
Of the apartments, right? Yeah. How much that's going to break down to in a price per unit, et cetera, for land value. No, I agree with you, because it's hard to find that much size, right, in Miami anymore. Well, except now we're tearing everything down, so maybe it's not that hard. But so anyway, I think that's the interesting part. And then where it's located, right, it's, directly next to a school, across the street from some a townhouse development. Mm-hmm. And to your point, super easy access to and from the Palmetto, the 826, and the airport. And Doral has really been putting in a lot of residential units over the last several years. Well, I should say the last decade. So it is becoming, much higher density than it originally was. It was originally just warehouses. But behind this, right, you still have warehouses, right? And some of the warehouses recently have been converted. There's a Baptist hospital, Cancer Institute back there now. We're seeing a lot more medical coming into the area with the construction of Jackson Memorial's emergency, kind of satellite hospital in Doral. So I just think it's really interesting, because I was quite surprised that they tore it down.
How many units are they planning on?
I believe it's 380.
So 380, and then according to the Live Local Act, 40% of those units would be right. So
Correct.
Roughly 120 of those units are going to be
workforce. Mm-hmm.
380. Yeah, so 152 of those units would be workforce housing, which it'll be interesting to see. Because we have a lot of those units in development that are Live Local Act projects, but they've yet to be completed. And so it'll be interesting to see how, I feel like there's been a little bit of a race to completion of these projects. On paper, those things pencil out, but it would be interesting to see how, if all those units come in at a similar timeline, mm-hmm, right? How really is that going to affect even the market value of the market rents of the remaining, 230 units or so?
Right. I think this has a lot going for it because it is in Doral. I wouldn't necessarily consider it walkable or even great transportation access. It's not. It's definitely going to be a car-centric building because it's not close enough. It's not like the buildings in downtown Doral that you can walk down and step, into the shopping and the restaurants. So it's still going to be car-based in an area that, to your point, is heavily congested, especially during daytime hours with all of the warehouses and trucks and everything else coming in and out of Doral. But hey, these people are smart. I mean, they're in it to make money, obviously. For sure. So I just think it's super interesting to see the transition of that property.
It's a big bet.
It's a big bet. I mean, and Doral is a good place to bet, right? We talked during our mid-year update, we talked about how many affordable units and workforce housing mixed use came on at the same time, and how our rents, we're seeing concessions. We're seeing a lot of buildings, especially along the transit corridor, which this one isn't. Again, to my point, this one I think is going to be successful because it's in Doral, and all of the economic drivers that surround Doral, namely the airport. I think it's going to do well, and I think it's probably going to lease up faster than some of the other ones that are on the transit corridor but don't have so many drivers going, for it.
Now, alternatively, right, the other option would have been for them to convert that office, leave it as an office would have been an option, right? Or to convert the space, which, we've spoken about how difficult it is to do a conversion. But, another project that you mentioned during our mid-year update is a project where they're actually doing the office to multifamily conversion.
Right. And that one I am excited about. I think it's super cool because I always thought it's in this weird wedge between the end of the 826 that dead ends on US 1 right near Pinecrest, just south of Dadeland Shopping Mall. And then the metro station / old busway and US 1. So it's this funky little wedge on South Dadeland Boulevard near the Daytrans Center. And it was 3 small, older office buildings that were built in the 70s and 80s. Yeah. And this company bought it, and it's called the Hive Dadeland. And they've taken one building and they've converted it. So they took 9,400. They left the shell. For those of you who live there and drive by there, that was the yellow building. They opened it up, gutted the inside, and I was curious because I've been driving by it for so long. And before I, read all the articles and everything, I was curious. I'm like, ooh, resi or office? And I thought it might be office, but we've looked at leasing a bunch of space in that area, and there is a lot of office space available for rent. It hasn't quite recovered from the pandemic, so there's a lot of office space for lease. There's a lot of newer office that's been developed. Great amenities. You can walk outside. You can walk to restaurants. You can walk to shopping. There's a big Marriott hotel nearby. Dadeland just built another hotel, the Aloft, on their property. So it's got a lot going for it. And then it's, a short walk to the Metro Rail station. It's close to the busway. You've got easy access onto the 826, the Palmetto. So this one is super, super interesting, and they gutted it and are building the residential units. Now, the other buildings are still office, so I don't know if eventually they're going to change that. They're still leasing them out as office space. They were renovated in 2010, so not too terribly long ago, and since then they've been updated and painted and stuff, but I just thought it was super interesting. They haven't quite finished that yet, but I'm sure they've probably started early rentals, but all the construction, scaffolding and everything is still up. Right. So anyway, I just thought that was that was a super interesting project. It was bought by Keystone, and they have this vision of, connecting to the underline and all of the social activity that's around there. So a little bit more vibrant and more energized and active than the one in Doral. But
just the walkability and the ability to really connect, right, to the amenities that are surrounding it in a very easy way. Makes a big difference. Now, this is a big bet, because we've spoken about how difficult it is to do that office to, apartment conversion.
Yeah, this one's going to be 212 units, so a little bit, smaller than the other one. They also bought it, a little while ago, but I don't know. It looks like they're going to eventually convert some of the other ones. I don't know if they're waiting and see, but if you read Keystone's vision for the place, the first one was 9,400, and then they've got 9,450, which they have as a development site, and then the other one, which is 9,500, which is the third and final building, and that's the one that's closest to Daytran. That one they also have listed as a potential office to resi conversion. Again, to your point, this lot is 8.4 acres. Right. So, a good chunk of space.
I mean, that makes a big difference, Just the cost of doing that conversion, we've spoken about the fact that you have to create new plumbing stacks. Usually you wouldn't have, enough plumbing to subdivide all the units. You got to take care of do you have enough windows in every bedroom that you're going to design. So the design of it is going to be, it's such an important aspect of it. Oftentimes then the parking, the way that it is currently set up doesn't work. So you have to reconfigure that. All of those things are going to make for an interesting design. So I'm eager to see it when it's over, to see how they converted it.
Well, and that's only 3. The one that I'm talking about is where the first one is. That's Hive North. So that's Hive South. So that's 3 buildings. And then on the other side, they've got another 3, which is Hive North. And so this is going to be a full 8, that 8 acres is all going to be developed into something that's a lot more connected, a lot more social, and integrated.
It's also really interesting because it's a combination of adaptive reuse, but it's also new construction, because they're going to do a new office building. Probably they're thinking, that they definitely want to have that Class A building there, and I think in total they want to have 580 apartment units, in the entire complex. So it's going to be a big complex. It's going to be a multi-year effort, but that would be interesting. I will tell you that I think I was looking at an office building that someone had sent me, and I've seen a couple of these happen, and perhaps this is the reason why that office building that was built in the 90s, when it's demolished, you're thinking, well, it's only 30 years old. What's the big deal? But because the floor plates of every floor is very difficult to subdivide. We've seen it in a couple of projects where we've visited as well, where if you wanted to create smaller office spaces to lease out, it just makes it very difficult, because you have to put a lot of money in order to reconfigure the space. And it's just the way that it was designed, because these floor plates are usually, 18 to 22,000 square feet. That's a very different proposition than to lease out 3,000 square foot office spaces. I think that a big part of the issues of reconfiguring those 1990s office buildings is the way that those floor plates were designed. We may yet see more conversions or more, demolitions, in the future for those Class C office buildings. Of course, as we've spoken, Class A and Class B are doing, extremely well. And, Miami and Miami-Dade County, South Florida overall has the healthiest, office market in the country. And it has for a long time.
Great. Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see what comes there. Keystone is very experienced. I think they've done a lot of conversions in Philly, so this isn't definitely their start. And they've owned this property for a while, so they've been able to manage it and see the flow of people, and they're very familiar with the neighborhood surrounding it. So I'm excited.
Yeah, plus their basis is probably very low just because of how long they have owned the property. So all things that are important in making those investment decisions. Well, listen, asking the audience, what have you seen in as far as, adaptive reuse conversions out there? Share with us. Is there anything that catches your attention in regards to a cool project? I love how when you speak about the project, Jennifer, you speak about its place within that community and within that neighborhood, within that block, and how it's going to interconnect. Because I think that is a very important component. Some people, they look at development and they almost look at their projects as if they were in a vacuum. And you could say, well, look, I got 7 acres, so whatever I built, it could be self-sustaining, but that's not really the case. And so I think that's why you're so excited about the Hive, is the idea that there is much more to it than just whatever they can build that is self-sustaining.
Well, what I like about it is that they're a developer who they bought the block, right?
Right. So,
they bought the whole block. So if you go in and you just do one development and you build your building, you build your residential towers, and then you move to another market and you build another, you're not really having a huge impact overall on the vision of the community. And so for me personally, I just relate more with the buy the block, do the bulk and put your vision in there. And hopefully, and in this case, I think it's very clear, the developer meshes with the needs of the surrounding community, and it's a good fit.
For sure. I think that it is very fitting because there is, I believe, a new wave of developers that are thinking along those lines, and we've seen it in small scale infill development, and we've seen it in these big projects, that there is a sense that if location is so important, right, then location is important because of what the community around it is able to provide. And so developers have started to look at that as amenities that they don't have to build. They're already there, but we can enhance it and we can provide easy access to them. And that changes the game. I also love what you say, which is, there's an old saying that is a cliche, but it is true. Buy the ugliest house in the best block. Mm-hmm. Well, you don't have to worry about that if you could buy the whole block and just, and just completely improve it. So, it's a great place to be. So definitely exciting for those projects. There's a lot going on in South Florida, and hopefully we'll bring you a little more information along the way. All right. So thank you guys for pulling up a chair and joining us for another episode, this brief episode of Between Two Chairs. Once again, Jennifer and I really appreciate, when people reach out to us and let us know that they're listening and that they like the podcast. We would love your feedback, of course, and any ideas, themes, anything that you want us to cover. We would love to hear from you as well. So for Jennifer and I will bid you adieu.
Adios. Ciao.
See, we're global. Proof that we're global. Bye, everybody.